tinha falado. Não era, adicionou.
Fazer perguntas sobre o que
se recusava a pagar
bem mais interessante.
Quando a gente faz consultoria, a gente gagueja, a gente não faz
Domínio na cabeça, mas
então pega o conteúdo e parece que a gente nós somos imbecil falando de outra língua.
Alô, alô. Oi, nós estamos voltando. Aqui no Zoom, vocês nos ouvem. Agora nós vamos abrir para perguntas. Deixa eu ver o chat. Tá, então o som está funcionando, estamos ouvindo. Então a gente vai abrir a discussão. We are going to open a discussion for some questions. João has some questions regarding the readings. Alguém quer começar? Alguém tem alguma pergunta que queira iniciar a discussão? No Zoom. Temos alguma pergunta no Zoom? João, quer começar? Mary, I'm opening for questions.
Okay.
João has brought some topics regarding the readings,
Okay.
so we may start with him.
Sure.
Can I get the other?
Yeah. You want to
Maybe
sit down?
it's good if you come here so that you can be seen to the camera.
I can trade chairs with you. So
No, it's not.
No. I want you on the camera.
I just can turn the computer. You can
But
stay
how
here.
about the camera?
Oh, you
Yeah, you should be in the camera.
Okay, to see you.
They don't need to see me when you're talking. Change places. I'm going to be insistent. I have authority. You have to go there.
Okay. Oh. So.
Does that mic work?
Yes. So, I didn't bring an resume of the text because you've just presented it like much better than I could do it. So I just I chose one point of the text for us to reflect on, and it was in the text of Henderson, yes,
Yeah.
and that is irony of the Lizochtis.
Oh, Lehotsky?
Lehotsky.
Lehotsky. I'm always happy when
This is
somebody else has trouble pronouncing because I have trouble pronouncing.
So Lihotsky kitchen, because there was this context about those women's club that were like against the New Women movement and those the redomestication of women,
Yeah.
and maybe she contributed to that while making this kitchen. So it didn't change, it didn't cut at root, as you said, the patriarchy problem, because it didn't dismiss women from their domestic labor, other than reinforce the second division of labor, and make sure that this second shift is still determined towards women, no? So it was reinforced by this scientific thinking that this would be the best way of making food or organizing this space, no? So, and I wanted to bring some questions about this irony, and I would like to bring other examples, that some things that we still do here or in the world, that they're trying to be like progressive, and instead of they're just replicating some of this patriarchy structure. So although in Lihotsky kitchen, when she worked in Lowe's, and I would like to bring like the text of Colomina, that she criticized his interiors as a domestic voyeurism, and despite the kitchen being being freeing woman, the other inner spaces of the domestic house reinforced their role as domestic parts. And I brought three examples of things that are not really architectural, but maybe reinforces that this sexual division of labor that still remains today, that is, and you mentioned it before, like maternity leave, that it's only for women, and some companies are still struggling to do it with for men, and because it gives, like, legally the only possibility to take care of the child is for women because of a legal adjustment. Of course, there's a biological need, of course, but so, and for a gay couple as well, that if they want to adopt, that we don't have this kind of paternity leave here or anything. So this reinforces it, and it replicates it to the household. And other things in more abstract way, and I thought as a marriage as patriarchal structure that only views the family as one kind of type of family, that is monogamic and based on ownership and based on a contract. And so this, and like when we struggle, like for gay marriage, for example, we are trying to be included in an institution that is already structured by this patriarchy, and this was one of the ironies that the Henderson brought in her text, no? When Lihotzky herself said that this could be like reinforcing things, no? And the other thing is what I said yesterday, the bathroom sign, and I wanted, and as well as in the first, the 20th century, there's clubs of women that were against the free women movement, and they were trying to defend the redomestication. Today, and our former government, Bolsonaro, we had a minister called Damaris Alves, that she was the Minister of Family, Women and Human Rights, and she defended clearly, like putting apart from any feminist agenda, that she, like for example, boys wears blues and girls wears pink, and this is other thing that, and she is not, as Lihotzky said, and she doesn't want to be aligned with feminist agenda, and this is still working on. This is still happening in Brazil and other kinds of country, by defending the value of family and this kind of family, this kind of structure, and this is not directly architectural or in kind of shape, but it is, I think, reinforcing these issues. So, and the other thing is that the capitalist thing of thinking the kitchen as a product and the private space becoming a product, as so as well as, so that's another question that I wanted to tell you too. I don't know if I made myself clear because I became a little bit nervous. Okay.
Should never be nervous. But I get nervous too. Anyway, these are very rich questions, and they actually bring up the point that Gret Lihotzky herself made. Should I sit here? No, don't. Oh no, the light is too strong.
No, you can sit.
Oh, okay. That how much can architecture do? I don't think architecture can change paternity leave, or although architects as individuals can fight for it. And certainly when we set up firms, we can try to institute in our own firms, or fight in our own firms, or fight in our universities. I will say I'm very lucky to be at a university that gives men paternity leave, gives gay men paternity leave, that gives gay men health insurance if they've been with a long-term partner. You don't have to be married or not. But there's certainly a long heritage or residue of this institution that's very, it's heterosexist, it's patriarchal, etc., that we still carry a legacy. It's still very hard in the US to have children and not get married if you want to protect the rights across all states. It's possible, but it usually demands good lawyers. Whereas in the Netherlands or France, I almost think marriage seems unnecessary for many couples who have children. I don't know the situation in Brazil, so it really varies. Things like abortion rights have something to do with architecture, in that having birthing clinics, Lori Brown, an amazing feminist architect, activist, writer in the US, has been designing clinics that are like half camouflage so that people can go to them at least where it's legal without getting protests and facing personal risk. But for the most part, the legislation is passed or not passed probably doesn't have to do with architecture. So I think we have to be honest about the limits of our field, what we need to do as citizens versus what we need to do as architects. So that would be one point that I make. But I also think this issue is, the kitchen is such a funny, complicated thing, because I wonder at times if men decided it was okay to use the kitchen when they started becoming efficient, full of nice new appliances. And I always joke that it's men who like the trophy kitchens in the US, so they can do their show-off cooking on weekends when they have time. And often the women get stuck with the everyday cooking. I used to feel like I cooked twice. Once for my daughter when she came home and needed to eat by 7 o'clock, and once when my husband came home late from work. No architecture solves that. Social conventions do. But I did think nice kitchens made it more acceptable for men to work in the kitchen. So that's a joke, but it's also maybe a grain of truth. What else in those rich questions? This issue of reinforcing roles or not, yes, it reinforced the role of women in the domestic sphere, but it also, I can't help it, think it alleviated work, freeing women for other pursuits. And I don't think that was a totally lost cause. I also think just eliminating drudgery, whoever's doing it, is a good thing. You can say, as the feminists did, that Gretchen Lohatsky didn't talk about the joys of cooking. But I'm not sure, it's always wonderful to cook when you have time, when you're not tired, when you aren't working 8 hours a day. I used to come home from teaching studio, just wiped, and how many simple pasta meals where I could make the sauce while I cooked the pasta. It got pretty repetitive, but I think we all have gone through that. But again, thinking about how architecture intersects with social issues, I think is really critical, but how much it can do is also a limit. But we can focus on program like Elizabeth Denby did. We can really insist on collective amenities. Daycare, whether we succeed or not, is another question. Any other questions on the talk too? That was very interesting. Or do you have more to respond?
I do.
Yeah.
I'm not open. Can I?
On
Zoom.
Okay. Thank you very much. I like very much. It's about.
Can you open your camera so that we can see you?
No. Yes, but I'm cooking right now. I'm listening to the class and cooking.
Okay, that sounds very appropriate.
Very nice. And the text, also the text. I have something, I wrote something, and I'm going to read about the text. Henderson.
Yes.
RFG was a regression in relation to humans' achievements, a conservative change. Also, it was a type of social control in favor of capitalist industry. But what about Henry Ford's speech about the worker having a family which would make him save so he could buy the products produced by his factories? Wouldn't this all be a mechanism to act on valued systems, shaping a habitus of classes below the elite as consumers? Wouldn't both be a way of intervening in the value system, creating needs and desires? It's not about architecture, but the context of this, okay? But affects architecture, ways of being in society, values, desire, and so on.
Yeah, and you remind me that I didn't address the capitalism question, and so I'm very glad you brought that up, and I think your point is very legitimate, and it's what Szydlochowski would say herself, that the social structures have to be addressed, but you're also right that architecture can touch on it in some ways, but we have to think of the context. You should probably know, and it probably is clear from the essay, not only on a personal note, Susan Henderson was my student. I was her doctoral advisor. It was a kind of accident because her original advisor, George Collins, got ill, and I took over. It was my first doctoral student. And Susan was very left-wing. She wrote for Radical History, and I think you can see her political interests come through in that essay. With Szydlochowski, it's interesting because I think you're right. The point made earlier, the kitchen becomes a consumerist product. So in some ways it becomes part of capitalism, even if Neue Frankfurt might be seen as an experiment in municipal socialism. It was a very progressive government, and it's not an accident that Ernst May, just like Hannes Meyer with the Bauhaus, takes a brigade to the Soviet Union, and including Gret Lohotsky. She was left-wing, there's no question, and a very courageous woman who became increasingly left, and risked her life fighting Hitler and was imprisoned during World War II. But I think it's a double story about the kitchen in Frankfurt, because she wanted it genuinely to be, and I disagree a little with Susan, I think it was meant to really serve working class women originally, as well as middle class women. Most of the people living in Das Neue Frankfurt, in Neue Frankfurt, were not wealthy or even prosperous middle class. They were workers, maybe lower middle class as well. But the cost, even though she worked so hard to reduce costs, it wasn't even enough given the economy in Weimar in that period. When we think about the poverty, the inflation was so bad in Weimar, Germany, that everything ended up costing people so much. And as I said, electricity was very expensive. So sometimes people couldn't even use their electric lights or whatever because the electric bill was too much. So there were times when the goal and reality didn't mesh together. I'm sort of the belief that architecture can be on the side of a certain political position, but it can't really change the politics on its own, for sure. And I keep always I try to remind my students to get very idealistic. My project will do X, Y, and Z, that I'm not sure their designs can actually change necessarily the way people live. And people also can live in very traditional structures in very innovative ways. And the example that I was talking to Mara about the other day, not a residence, was the prison in Cuba. The Ile de Pinos, or the Isle of Pines prison. I don't know if any of you know it. It was a big, like, Jeremy Bentham panopticon, but when Raul Castro and Fidel took it over, they turned it almost into a socialist commune. So how these roles change, often the same architecture can serve different ends. Or I think of Fourier's Phalansterie, an example of utopian socialism, was really based on Versailles and the most, autocratic royal power. So how a same formal model can have different purposes, I think we have to acknowledge. So I suspect buildings in capitalism could be used for other purposes, just like we've seen buildings from the Soviet Union's most idealistic phase be transformed into, I don't know what you'd call the Soviet Union, Russia today, but a kind of oligarchic capitalism, state capitalism, what do you call it? But again, the same building can have different functions sometimes. Thank you so much for this provocative question. I don't know if I answered it really.
Very much. I'm liking very much. Thank you.
We have someone on Zoom, Barbara. Barbara, she has prepared some points regarding the readings.
Yes. Eu não consigo compartilhar. Consegue liberar?
Não precisa compartilhar, Bárbara, pode só fazer.
Tá. Não, é porque eu até tinha umas imagens aqui para mostrar, na verdade, de algumas coisinhas. Mas tudo bem, sem problema. Talking about the teaching, outside from the architecture dialogue, like in the medium cities of Brazil, in the cities we don't have architecture schools. So basically, the engineers who are mostly men will produce the kitchens. And if you saw the kitchens, the refrigerators are like out the kitchens, because the kitchen is the space for the maid. It's a woman, but it's not the lady of the house. And the kitchen will be simply, and I'm from Belém, so it's my reality. It was my reality when I was there. It's a space for a maid, it's a woman, but it's not part of the house. So the kitchen is just to serve the other space, the other room. And this is one point of questions, like how this dialogue between gender in the design of the kitchens can be like extrapolated for places without architecture, but just places which reproduce the sites. The other questions about the text is about the space to live and design with people. The space that are supposedly appropriate for the people. So I work in the UN, and we are like all the time asking, which is the perfect time to listen and to put the woman inside the projects. We have like hospitals, we have schools, but we don't have like the human being. We have like the architects and the projects and the time, but where's the people, where's the women needs? How can you implement a good designer thinking about people? How we can not assume there's this space is a space who someone wants to, but how can we listen in the project, in the process of design? Oh, there are 2 questions. Sorry.
No, they're very good questions, and I'll do my best to bring up some points related to them. First, I think you're so right that the servant issue has much to do with it, and I think it was actually why I brought it up, and the timing is very different in Brazil, where I think families kept servants for a much longer time than they did in Europe and certainly in the US. The whole issue of domestic reform had to do with basically changing the servant economy, that there was perceived to be a servant crisis, and that suddenly the woman of the household had to be involved in the kitchen. But, or there were no longer as many servants, so the woman was involved with the servant in the kitchen, which was the problem when the kitchen was too small, like the Frankfurt kitchen. So I think you're totally right. What's kind of depressing hearing about it is that the servant is viewed as other and the space as other, and that architects think they don't have to worry about servants. But strangely, I'll use the example that I know the best. Le Corbusier was very aware of this. Excuse me. He publishes in this book that Margaret mentioned, L'Art Décoratif d'Aujourd'hui, cartoons of servants having status of the housewife, leaving the household. The whole servant crisis had a lot to do with his proposals for the Immeuble Villa and that little manifesto I showed you, the Manifesto for Living, that realizing that the woman of the household, unfortunately not enough the man of the household, had to take over what used to be the servant's job. So I think you're totally right that because it was for the servants, it was relegated to a sort of other space. And I think, I was shocked to see, like in the design of Brazilian, there were still little bitty servant bedrooms, am I right? This would have been unheard of in the US almost. I grew up in American suburbia, a middle-class family. We didn't even have a cleaning lady. We had nobody. My mother did everything. She didn't work the first few years when we were little, but then she went to work, so she got us to work too. That was her solution. So that's a good point. But the second point you make, I think, is also really interesting and relates to the women I spoke about. Both Lochocki and Denby especially. Lochocki did consult with women's groups. Whether she consulted enough, we could argue about, but she really did have a committee, ask opinions, and then responded when she found out that, like I said, the drawers were too low. She responded to the criticism. And this was true for her work all the way through her career. In the Soviet Union, she designed amazing children's components and furniture. Later, she did daycare centers and things, and she was very interested in hearing clients, not just the person paying, but the user. But we have very much more concrete evidence with Denby, because Denby, working originally in charity, but rejecting the paternalism of charity, had a committee. She set up in Kensal House a whole committee of residents that she was consulting with constantly and adapting things in response. So I think this idea, I call it like early participatory planning. Almost before we used the term participatory planning, they were interested in this consultation process. Whether it's genuinely democratic or whether there's still a kind of paternalism involved, I think we can question. There's no question that both Lhotsky and even Denby thought they were experts. But they did try to hear other voices. But I'm even going to tell you about, the big names, and maybe it was something they learned later in life. I don't know if you ever read the little book that Philippe Boudon did on Pessac, a project Marguerite mentioned. Corbusier's answer when he was asked about, Le Corbusier, when he was asked about all the changes the residents did to the buildings, he said the people are always right. Now, was he being cynical or was he being honest? Maybe a little bit of both. But he never said it should be changed back to the way it was. He accepted that the buildings could change. And probably in contrast to Mies van der Rohe, it was one reason he was so hesitant about designing furnishings or having a controlled interior. He wanted to give residents a role in their environment. But this varied architect to architect. Frank Lloyd Wright was a total control freak. Gesundkunstwerk. And he even complained about sitting in his own chairs and getting a sore rear end. They vary, these various male figures. But good questions, thank you. And I guess, should we turn to Giovanna?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for reading the readings carefully, too.
There's one more student who brought topics, but I think we should turn to Giovanna. We have only 20 minutes.
Yeah, but I also have someone prepared. Do they want one quick question, or?
Camila, do you want to do one quick question before we turn to Giovanna?
Or she can also talk next Wednesday.
Yeah. Camila, do you hear us? So let's turn to Giovanna, and if Camila...
Maybe tell Camila that if she wants to bring it up. My talk Wednesday next week will be like the third component of today's talk, so any other questions you have, you can bring up then, because they will relate. It's just focusing on another person, but many of the issues are very similar.
Okay, so she can do the questions, Giovanna.
Let me just say one thing. I just am thrilled that a couple of students, doctoral students, but other students are welcome too, are doing research on topics related to women or gender. It doesn't have to be biography or putting someone in the canon. If any of you have presentations you want to make for next Friday, I'm not planning on giving a lecture. I just want it to be discussion, student or faculty presentations. I want it to be very much an open session. I think you've heard, by then you're going to have heard enough from me.
So Giovanna is going shortly to present her research. I'll let you explain. You can sit here.
So maybe introduce yourself or introduce Giovanna. I love the end of the introduction when she thanks all these women. Well, I'm excited to have it. I started reading, sort of thumbing through it during the break.
Hello. Well, this is intimidating. My name is Giovanna. I'm currently a PhD student in Mackenzie University in São Paulo, but I'm from Paraná, and I came here in person at Professor Mary's lecture, and she's giving me space to introduce my research, and it's going to be a short introduction. I'm currently in my second year, so what I have most is questions and doubts, so it's not going to take that long. Since I'm from Paraná, most of my questions come from the place where I grew up, and I went to São Paulo to be advised from Professor Ruth, because she's on that line of research about modern life, modern housing, and of course the paper of women in all those questions in developing housing interiors. Currently, the name of my research is The Shapes of Modern Life, Curitiba's House Design and its Interiors. And for those who don't know, Curitiba is located in South Brazil. I have here a map. It's right here, the state of Paraná. We are currently right here, and the state of Paraná is here. And here is Curitiba in the state of Paraná. And the main question that I have is, what I did also in my master's is a change of the main research that we students that are in South Brazil, we always have research that always look into the modern houses and all the publications about Rio and São Paulo, and the researches and the projects that are built in the state of Paraná, South Brazil, or even the Northeast are overshadowed, and we have this eager to bring it to life and bring it to the light. And the dwellings in Curitiba, the state of Paraná, are one of those examples. And that's what I did in my master's, and now in my PhD program, it's another look, but it's kind of in the same line of perspective. So here, just not to take that long, my geographical cut is Curitiba, the state of Paraná in Brazil. My historiographical cut is the 1940s until the 60s. And the main question that I ask is, Curitiba being in a city out of the big cities like Rio and São Paulo, how it got like modernized, how the modern architecture got there, and how the population that it's more like the population wasn't open to the innovations, and how the architects that mainly got there from São Paulo were able to modernize the city and were able to produce such a wild example of like modern houses. And currently in my research, my document sources are lifestyle magazines, domestic manuals, fashion decorating manner magazines. That's when I got interested in Professor Mary's lecture, because in doing so and getting deep into researching the lifestyle magazines, we see a lot of crazy articles about how women must behave and how they are like they are the trophy wives, and how they appear as just in the pictures. This magazine, A Divulgação, that went from 1853 to 1975, would disseminate to the population the modern living, and it would have like manner articles for the women. And the main question that popped up was, but would women just be housewives, or would they help their husbands to develop the floor plans as well? And that was one question that came up. And here are some of the articles: the woman at the home and society, and an example of functional architecture. So currently, the idea is to go from the 1940s to the beginning of the 1970s, and see how one of the objects of the research, of course not all of it, to see how the impact of the women helped to shape the floor plans as well, not only as the housewives and housekeepers, but as the wives of the clients, because in many of the examples so far, the women didn't have a voice, and the project was only for the men of the house. So that's a question that's being brought up. And also how the modernization throughout the decades helped to change also the shape of the floor plans in the house as well, and women being on the brought to work and being outside the house, not only taking care of the children as well. So that's how the research is going so far, and that's about it.
Thank you, Giovanna. Mary, do you want to
I just have
say
a
something?
question. Maybe it's too soon, but I'm just curious if you have some speculations on how strong the women were in shaping these environments, and how it changed in the time period you're talking about. If you see changes from the 40s to the 60s.
Yes, I've already seen some changes, not only because of the women, but also because of the change of the decades, because there was a big leap, mainly in its interiors, because of the French interior. Then the living room gained space based on the English living rooms. And then modernist starting getting some space, and mainly because there was a big change in Curitiba in the 60s. I think the biggest leap was from the 40s to the 60s, because some architects from São Paulo went to Curitiba, and they were like full of ideas, and they gained space and heard their wives, because they were projecting their house for themselves and their families, and their wives were heard as well. So there were a lot of open plan spaces and open kitchens as well. So I think that's the main thing, and also with the modern interiors as well. So I think that was the biggest that I can see so far. But I can say the house for themselves, for the architecture themselves. For their clients, I don't know as much now.
In fact, that brings up a really good point to think about, how the open plan changed, because despite, for instance, Le Corbusier's discussion of the open plan, most of the kitchens up until the kitchen I'll show you next Wednesday were separate closed rooms. And in general, except for low-cost housing, usually public housing, where the idea was the kitchen and dining were combined, kitchens were closed, for instance, in France, especially if they weren't rural kitchens. And this is very different than the US, where the idea of, first there were pass-through windows, where you would pass the food from the kitchen to the dining room. But by the 30s, in places like California, where there was a kind of progressive, more relaxed lifestyle, the idea of open kitchens became very fashionable. This did not hit Europe till really quite late, because you can see the most sophisticated, advanced, modernist houses, whether we're talking Adolf Loos, whether we're talking Mies van der Rohe, whatever, the kitchens are mostly closed. One of the most open floor plans, though, really in terms of living, is the Schroeder house, where the woman had, Mrs. Schroeder, Truth Schroeder, had a big impact. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because for all my discussion of kitchens, I don't know why, kind of lacuna in my presentation, I didn't discuss, maybe because it wasn't yet so strong in Europe in the 20s, but this issue of the open kitchen became important. So it wasn't just about efficiency, it was about a more relaxed lifestyle between relaxation and work, or entertaining. And I showed it briefly, but you probably didn't notice, a cartoon that Corbusier published from 1935, where there's an open kitchen from a woman's magazine, and he says in the caption, women have broken with restraining customs, and they brought in a new way of living. And I think this idea of getting rid of the hierarchies that an open kitchen suggests is a really significant change, even if the women are still doing the cooking.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Giovanna. Thank you,
Let me
Anne.
just thank Giovanna. And thank you, Giovanna. I look forward to hearing more how the research goes. It's a great topic. And I just want to really stress this research. I think we need to do more with popular magazines, with the press, just generally see how space, architecture, gender intersect. It doesn't have to be women designers, even if that's been my focus in many of the talks thus far.
Thank you so much, Giovanna and Mary. We still have Nina, so you prefer, Mary, to switch to Friday?
It's more everybody's
Hungry?
energy, or Nina can talk on, Nina's on.
I'm here.
Oh,
If you
you're
prefer, I can talk on Friday. Whatever is best for you. Just a sec.
You will have more time on Friday,
Okay.
but it's also nice to hear you in person. I just don't know how much energy your colleagues have. What is your topic, Nina?
here from Rio.
Yeah.
My advisor is Maria Cristina Cabral.
Yeah.
And I'm studying Love Hotel in Leblon, and the memories of the pleasure detached from the city in the 20s and in the 30s. And so I prepared a presentation, but if you prefer, I can talk on Friday, whatever it's better.
It's more, you will have more time on Friday, but it's also nice to do in person. So it's more how the audience feels. Okay. We may have a short class on Friday. We'll see.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Mina.
First, I would like to thank you very much for the classes for the last few days. Well, good afternoon. Thank you a lot, Professor Mary. And my name is Nina Zones, and my advisor professor is Maria Cristina Cabral. I'm a student here for my master's, and I have to say that this research here is really new because I've recently changed the subject of my research. And well, it's a little bit raw, I'd say, but let's talk a little bit about it. So in English, a possible title, Leblon Love Hotel, Memories of Pleasure Detached from the City in the 20s and in the 30s. And well, here I'm proposing the unrevealed story about a building designed to be a prestigious hotel, but that was actually known for being used as one of the first love hotels in the city. Why is that? Was it because of its location? Did the distance encourage lovers who didn't want to be seen? How is it related to the way the city was being appropriated at the time? Not only by men, but how now also for women, by women. And here are some songs, part of songs. I'm gonna read the first one in English. So the kiss started in Realengo, which is a neighborhood here, got hotter in Flamengo, another neighborhood, and ended in Leblon. It's a carnival song from 1935. And about the neighborhood and the urban expansion, just try to pass through the session quickly so that we can spend more time in the section about related to women in the city. Just a little bit of context. Actually, it was commended for being a hotel, and hotels first were located in downtown area here in Rio, but mainly in the 20s there was a remarkable displacement heading to the seashore. So grand hotels were commissioned to be built for an universal explosion in 1922, serving in some cases as an urban expansion vector for areas that were still not well established. And it was the early ages of balneary culture here being created in Rio. And a little bit also the important role played by the tram as a public transportation in the city, in this case connecting downtown area to, at the time, distant neighborhoods by the sea, especially here talking about the Atlantic Ocean coast by neighborhoods like Copacabana, Ipanema, and Leblon afterwards. So here is a photograph of Leblon in 1919, Leblon Beach, really empty still.
But in this year, 1919, Leblon received its first subdivision, the neighborhood, and also public lighting, and it started to be more infrastructure, but still really an empty space. And well, here, where were the women? Thinking in a space, this so-called love motel, as a place used both by men and women, we raise here the question, where were the women in the city? How can we comprehend the transformation process in which women begin to move around in the streets, penetrating the public realm that was once forbidden for us? And so here there are, of course, lots of hypotheses. I'm bringing an historian called Rosa Araújo, and she says that he used social and economic development in the end of the 19th century marks a new lifestyle for women, new socialization forms that were getting diversified, and especially after important number of transformations here in Rio, like in the period of Pereira Passos, and well, different forms of new socialization, like walking on the streets, the tram here again as a public transportation, a new form of social interaction, and also a way of displacement in the city, and forms of leisure that was linked with modern times, like the World's fairs that happen in the city, theater as well as another form of leisure, cafes, stores that were beginning to be used by those women. And also other forms of activity and leisure, like the sea bath, starting to be appreciated not only for its medical purposes like before, but also as a leisure activity. And with that also we can gradually see more of people's bodies too, turning into something visible in the city. And other activities like dances and the images of modern women, dancing in clubs, jazz or samba. And well, I'm going to try to be more quickly. Here are some of the readings that are helping me to understand a series of different issues. And those four on the top helping me to understand those boundaries that were being broken between the house and the street, the domestic realm and the public realm. And well, it's important here to stress also, like Giovanna brought us the development of communication media, especially the illustrated magazines, and how it was important for a transformation on the image culture. And there are a lot of studies about these women, how they were being illustrated in the 20s. They called Roaring 20s. But one caught my attention, not for chance, of course, this one called the apple. A maçã. The apple actually referring to the apple in the Bible related to the history of sin. Here the woman is the main character, and this editor, who was an important writer at the time, who is Humberto de Campos, he used to write tales and stories about love affairs, whether it was between couples like boyfriend and girlfriend, or whether it was like a married man with a woman who was not his wife. And I'm finishing. So, a distant love hotel. How could we search for this unrevealed story? If sex is still considered a taboo, how could we look for information about how and where people were getting together for that purpose in the city? And what I'm doing now is trying to search in those pages, firstly in this magazine. So for forbidden spaces, we are consulting like unauthorized research sources. Those tales and stories written by those prestigious writers that used to write in these magazines. to comprehend what was going through people's minds at the time, which places in the city could be being used for love encounters. It's finishing. Yeah. Well, it's not charging, but...
Give it a moment.
Okay. And here is just a passage from another magazine, and I'm gonna read it. Frivolous and inconsequential, Madame told the adventure to friends with in a superiority way. She remembered to call an old boyfriend. They had gone together, some sea bathing together, and the unexpected love episode ended ... in the Blanc Hotel. Well, it's just the first steps of this research. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nina. Does anyone wants to?
Yeah. Any questions for Nina? What a great topic. I thought of one thing, and I'm curious if any of you had thoughts. There's a phrase in the US, honeymoon hotel. It's not the same thing as a hotel for affairs, but this idea of this special place that's sort of removed from everyday life. And I can't help it. I referred to it in an essay I wrote that I think I gave you for the website. That I wrote on Everyday and Other Spaces, which was a kind of response to Foucault. And he talks about the honeymoon hotel as an other space, a heterotopia. And I don't know in your readings if you've read it, but it might be interesting to you just as a theoretical base to think about this notion of how it both is an extreme example of something or an other example challenging the status quo. For Foucault, these heterotopias are there either an intensification of a process going on, like control, or else represent a kind of counter process, like carnival, of freedom and letting go. And where this hotel stands in that spectrum might be fun for you and stimulating. I don't know how far you can, excuse me, take it, but it's one source I thought of right away. But I have a feeling others may have suggestions for you too. What a great topic and a lot of fun too.
Thank you a lot, Professor.
Oh, I think we could close for today. Does anyone here wants to?
Otherwise, next week on Zoom.
Yeah, next week Mary will be in Recife on Wednesday and Friday, and we will be on Zoom. We will change places. Thank you so much, Mary. It was wonderful to have you. Thank you, Nina and Giovanna.